What if everything you believed about your family was a lie? What if the person you raised, the one who called you mom, turned out to be the one who gave you life instead? People say truth sets you free, but they never tell you what it destroys first. My story began with a DNA test and ended with the collapse of reality itself. It started as a joke, one of those harmless, forgettable ideas that come from a night of wine and curiosity. A DNA test, just for fun. My daughter, Emma, had always been fascinated with ancestry, obsessed with tracing roots, as if she could map meaning out of bloodlines. I laughed at first, called it the new astrology for the bored middle class, but she insisted. I gave in because mothers do that. They humor their children's obsessions. We swabbed our cheeks, sealed the plastic tubes, and mailed them off without a second thought. That's how it began, the unraveling of everything. When the results came, I didn't even check right away. The email notification sat in my inbox for 2 days, buried under online receipts and spam. It was Emma who opened hers first. I remember her voice, trembling, disbelieving, the kind of tone that makes you freeze because it carries a truth too heavy for words. "Mom," she whispered, "I think something's wrong." I looked over her shoulder, expecting a glitch, a data mix-up, but there it was, a line of text that split the world in two. Biological relationship, child to parent. I blinked. The algorithm had it backward. Impossible, I thought. A system error, maybe a misread? But the more we checked, the clearer it became. According to the data, I was her daughter. I laughed then, the kind of laughter that cracks in the middle and turns into silence. I told her not to worry, that these tests sometimes made mistakes. But the seed was already planted, and once a seed of doubt takes root, it spreads fast. Emma stopped talking for a while, her face pale, her eyes hollow. She wasn't angry, she was scared. Scared of what this meant, scared of me. And somewhere deep inside, so was I. The days that followed were a blur of denial. I called the company, demanded explanations, but all I got were polite apologies and suggestions to verify through a secondary test. I took 3 more. All 3 said the same thing. The data was clear. Emma was my biological mother. That sentence alone defied the laws of biology, time, and logic. It shouldn't have been possible, yet there it was, undeniable, mathematical, clinical in its precision. No human warmth, just the cold certainty of digital truth. I found myself staring at that report at 3 a.m., over and over again, as if repetition could rewrite it. But numbers don't lie. People do. That was the first time I began to question my memories. I replayed childhood scenes, the birthdays, the scraped knees, the bedtime stories, and each time they felt thinner, more fragile, like film strips dissolving under light. What if memory itself was an illusion, a survival mechanism built to protect us from truths we can't survive? What if the people we love most are just reflections of lies too convenient to question? I started searching through old photos, boxes of letters, anything that could anchor me to something real. But even the images seemed to shift when I looked at them. Smiles that once looked maternal now seemed possessive, watchful. Every word from my mother, or the woman I thought was my mother, began to sound rehearsed. And yet, what disturbed me most wasn't the possibility that I had been lied to. It was the realization that I needed the lie. Because if it collapsed, so would I. That night, I went to bed repeating a single phrase in my mind: blood doesn't lie. But when I woke up the next morning, that sentence felt less like comfort and more like a curse. Because somewhere in the dark labyrinth of our family's history, the truth had been buried, and it was starting to claw its way to the surface. The next morning, I visited my mother. Or at least, the woman I had always called that. Her name is Margaret. 68 years old, quiet, graceful, with the kind of composure that makes her seem carved from something harder than flesh. When she opened the door, I noticed how calm she was, as if she had been expecting me. Maybe she had. Mothers have a way of sensing storms long before they arrive. I sat across from her in the living room that smelled faintly of lavender and dust. I held the DNA report in my hand like a loaded weapon. "Mom," I said softly, "I think there's been a mistake." She didn't answer right away. She just looked at me with that same unreadable gaze she's always had, the kind that could either mean infinite love or unbearable guilt. When I handed her the report, she didn't even flinch. She read it in silence, her fingers trembling just once before she folded it neatly and placed it on the coffee table. Then she said something that froze the air. "You were never supposed to find out." It was such a simple sentence, almost kind, but it hit me like a confession delivered through glass. I stared at her, waiting for an explanation that could make sense of the impossible. None came. She just sat there, her eyes distant, as if she were watching another lifetime unravel behind them. I asked her what she meant, begged her to talk to me, but she only said, "Some truths serve no purpose but destruction." That's when anger replaced fear. "You lied to me!" I shouted, though even as I said it, my voice cracked. Not because I hated her, but because I could feel the foundations of reality tilting. She didn't deny it. She just whispered, "I had to protect you from her." "Her," I repeated, and that's when I saw something I had never seen before. Fear in her eyes. Real, unfiltered terror. It was the first time my mother looked like a stranger. I left the house that day with the ground shifting beneath me. Every memory felt like an edited scene, someone else's movie spliced into mine. I started replaying every conversation we'd ever had, every silence, every hesitation, searching for hidden meanings. And then I realized something chilling. She had never told me the story of my birth, not once. Whenever I asked as a child, she'd deflect. "You were meant to be, that's all that matters." It had always felt poetic. Now it felt sinister. That night, I dreamt of two women standing over a crib. One of them smiled, the other wept. And I woke up gasping, with the sound of my own heartbeat louder than thought. I decided to dig deeper. I requested old hospital records, birth certificates, adoption forms, anything that could connect the dots. Most of it was sealed or lost. Convenient, isn't it, how truth is always the first thing to disappear in a lie this big? But fragments began to appear. A name I didn't recognize, dates that didn't align, a photograph of a teenage girl holding a baby that looked unsettlingly familiar. The girl was young, maybe 16, and though the photo was faded, I could see it. The same eyes, the same birthmark beneath the collarbone. It wasn't my mother, it was Emma. I remember dropping the photo, my breath caught, my hands trembled. The edges of the world blurred like watercolor in rain. Could it be true? That my daughter, my sweet, impulsive, headstrong daughter, was that girl? That somehow, through deceit or time or something more impossible, I had lived my life backward? After that night, I couldn't sleep. The walls of my home felt wrong, as if they were watching me. Every ticking clock became a reminder that time was no longer trustworthy. I started to believe Margaret's words. "You were never supposed to exist the way you do." What did that even mean? How could someone exist the wrong way? It sounded like madness, yet it rang with the terrible rhythm of truth. I became obsessed with uncovering what she meant. If Emma was my beginning, then where did my story truly start? I began to search for the origin of the lie, not in documents or official records, but in the silences between them. Silence, after all, is where truth hides best. I revisited the photo of the young girl holding the baby. The more I stared at it, the more it felt alive, as if something within it wanted to speak. I enlarged it, studied the background. A small hospital room, a calendar barely visible in the corner. The year printed on it was 2002, but Emma was born in 1998. The timeline didn't match. I confronted Margaret again. This time I didn't bring questions. I brought the photo. Her eyes darkened when she saw it. "You shouldn't have found that," she murmured. "We buried that version of you long ago." "Version?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "You were part of an experiment. A correction, they called it. Emma wasn't born. She was reinserted." The words made no sense, yet they carried a weight that crushed air itself. She told me that decades ago, a group of scientists had been studying cellular memory transmission, the theory that consciousness could pass not only through experience, but through DNA itself. Emma had volunteered. She was dying, Margaret said, though she never told me from what. They used her genetic material, her essence, to create a new life, a vessel of continuity. Me? I laughed then, hysterically, because it sounded insane, a conspiracy pulled from the corners of a dream. But Margaret didn't flinch. Her calm terrified me more than her words. They wanted to see if the past could rewrite itself, she said, if the daughter could be reborn before the mother, if love could loop back in time. I began to piece it together. I wasn't her mother. I was her continuation. She hadn't given birth to me through the body. She had become me through time. And Margaret, she wasn't our mother at all. She was the caretaker of the transition, the guardian of a biological paradox. That revelation broke something in me. What does identity mean when you are your own origin? What does time mean when birth and death become the same point on the circle? I stood in front of a mirror that night, staring into my reflection, and for a second, I could see her, Emma, not as my daughter, but as the woman I used to be. Her smile, her eyes, her voice in my head whispering, we were never meant to separate. In the days that followed, I felt myself disintegrating. Not physically, no, my body was still there, but in ways that defied language. It was as though I had become translucent, fading at the edges where my past and Emma's began to overlap. I could no longer tell which memories were mine. Sometimes I'd wake up remembering a life that wasn't this one, a lover's perfume, a different apartment, a death that felt too intimate to be imagined. I started writing everything down, trying to separate my thoughts from hers, but even my handwriting began to change. The letters curved differently, the rhythm was unfamiliar. My reflection no longer looked like a mirror, it was a stranger imitating me. Margaret stopped answering my calls. I think she knew this was inevitable, that once the truth is spoken, it doesn't rest, it spreads, it consumes. She had carried it for decades, and now that weight had passed to me. I went back to her house one last time. The door was unlocked. Inside, everything was covered in white sheets, like ghosts preparing for judgment. On the kitchen table, I found a single envelope addressed in her handwriting. For when you finally understand. Inside was a photograph, the same one of Emma holding the baby. But on the back was written a single line. You were never born. You were remembered. You felt like the ground vanished beneath me. Remembered. That word gnawed at my sanity. If I was only remembered, then what was I now? A thought that refused to die? I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The world felt paper thin, like a set built to house an illusion that had run too long. That night, I drove without a destination. The city lights bled through my windshield like liquid memory. Every face I passed on the street seemed to blur, familiar yet unknown, as if the boundaries of identity were collapsing everywhere, not just within me. I reached the cliffs outside the city, the place Emma used to take me, or I used to take her, when life felt too heavy to name. I sat there, staring at the horizon, where the sea met the void. The wind whispered like 1,000 old memories, looping endlessly. I felt her presence then, not as a ghost, but as a merging, two consciousnesses folding back into one. Her voice inside me said, "You were never supposed to live apart from me. You were the continuation, the next attempt." And for the first time, I understood what Margaret meant. Time isn't a line, it's a spiral. It doesn't move forward or backward. It turns inward, consuming and recreating itself. Emma and I weren't mother and daughter. We were one being, split across iterations, forced to relive different versions of the same existence until something within us learned to accept it. They say the truth sets you free, but they never mention what it frees you from. In my case, it freed me from myself, from the need to be someone, from the lie of beginnings, from the illusion of time. And in that final moment, as the tide reached the rocks below and the wind carried my breath into the vastness, I understood the truth at last. We don't live once. We live again and again until the memory finally forgives us.